Hello and welcome to Setting the Stage, episode 39, Jeph and Big Campaign. I've seen a lot of growth in the show over the last few months, and I'd like to keep it going. You can help by rating and reviewing the show on your favorite podcast app, telling a friend, or by telling any game masters you know to send in a survey to be on the show. You can find that survey at gocorral.com/STS. That's GOCORRAL.com/STS. And on to the show. I'm here today with Jeph from the Big Campaign podcast. Hi, Jeph.
Hello.
So before we get into talking about your campaign, who is Jeph outside of D&D and RPGs and podcasts?
I am a longtime liver up here in the Pacific Northwest. Huge Magic card nerd. Like a lot of us, I enjoy a lot of the varied shows of watching true crime to baking shows to whatever fun anime Hulu recommends me. Yeah, I mean, I'll be pretty honest. Besides walking around and kind of working on podcasts and nerd stuff, kind of just a boring dude. I like books and just kind of.
Yeah, when you take away all the interesting parts of yourself, you're boring. I get that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fluent in Portuguese. That's where I'm from. I'm from Portugal. But like I say, I've been in the Pacific Northwest for a long time. But
yeah, I was going to say, you don't have a Portuguese accent.
I do not. And funny enough, I don't have a Portuguese accent in Portuguese because my family comes from Angola, so I actually have an African accent when I speak Portuguese.
Oh, okay, all right. When did you move to the U.S.?
I've moved quite a bit. Let's see here. I've moved 20 times before I was 18.
Wow.
But, so I've been back and forth between Europe and America growing up.
That indicates military family, I'm assuming?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Really settled into the Northwest, I'd say, in the mid-90s. I was very confused when I got up to Seattle, and everybody was really into this really depressing, sad music called Nirvana, which I'd never heard of because Europe didn't have it yet.
All right.
So I was very caught off guard by how much plaid and sad music all these kids my age enjoyed. Instead of enjoying like the Bob Marley and the REM that you hear when you're traveling.
Yeah. So what got you into RPGs initially?
Really, it's honestly just bizarre chance. One of the times that I came here to the U.S., I think it was around 10, a friend's neighbor was doing a garage sale, and I saw a golden D20. I had no idea that dice came in sizes bigger than 6, and so I was really impressed with it. Asked the guy if I'd give him a quarter for the dice, and he's like, just take the whole box it comes in, which is an old first edition wizard module oh my goodness, my brain just restarted.
The old box set, yeah.
Adventure Path, right? Yeah, like some cover painted by Jeff Easley with some like wrinkly wizard on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun to look through, and I was like, oh, what are all these numbers and these weird drawings of these frog people and stuff? And years later, my aunt was an avid player of Vampire the Masquerade. And being older than me, but kind of getting stuck in the role of having to like babysit when I was young, she would just give me Vampire the Masquerade books to read. And I just would sit there all day and look through them like, wow, this is so neat. Look at all these rules that you can do for make-believe. This is crazy.
Yeah, those are much more fun to read for sure.
Yeah, especially older editions of Vampire.
Yeah.
Not so much fun to play. But it wasn't till the early 2000 when getting out of high school and starting in college, a friend showed up with a 3.0 Dungeons & Dragons book and said, let's start playing this game. And I remembered somewhere tucked in the back of a closet, I had a golden D20 that I had found 10 years before this.
Oh my God.
And so I was like, oh, I have a dice for this. I know what it's for now.
That's so funny.
And I actually still have the dice right here on the table in front of me. But yeah, so that's what kind of got me started into it. One friend DM'd for about 6 months and said, man, it'd be really cool if I could be a player. And I said, well, I'll give a shot to DMing. And that was 24 years ago, and I'm still DMing.
Wow. Okay. And it's the same group of friends too?
Yeah. The original joke was everybody made their campaigns and made their sessions, and then when everybody could show up, we would play Big Campaign, and that's why it had the name. So when only half the people show up, we'd play Troy's game or John's game instead. And so Big Campaign, people would come and go or join the military or go to different colleges, and there was always a table open for whoever wanted to play. And so, yeah, we just did that, and each time the world ended and friends kind of said, oh, I want to take a break or not, it still was always open. And yeah, over the course of all of it, I think about 5 players that have played in all of my games.
Yeah, I was about to ask how big the group was.
Yeah, there's about 5 core, but in like my current home campaign, I have 12 players split into 2 groups of 6.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, I think my biggest one is I did one game where I had 3 groups of 6 players each, so I had 18 players.
Oof. Okay.
Yeah.
I remember we talked on Discord a little bit about this, but you heard about the Setting the Stage podcast through the Monsters of Old Seattle podcast, right?
Yes. I saw them on Twitter, saw a few of their posts, and I was like, well, I'll give it a shot. That'll be a fun. I always like finding new podcasts and new game systems and new things to listen to. And so listening to their show, which I really enjoy, it got to the episode where you were speaking with him, with Brian, and you'd mentioned like, hey, if people want to come on or, more content, whatnot, reach out. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed listening to the episode. I was like, well, this sounds great. Let's see what I can do.
I was curious if you'd actually met Brian since then, actually.
I have not. I do believe Brian went on a fun vacation and I think is back now. But he and I have talked a bit, and we found out we actually live about 2 minutes away from each other.
Right.
Which is very fun to be like, oh, hey, you want to get a beer sometime? Sure. Where do you want to go? Well, I know a place. They're like, oh, yeah, the place is 2 minutes away. I'm like, oh, okay, so you live there.
You triangulated okay. It.
Yeah, it's like, all right, well, shoot. Then, yeah, when you're done with your vacation, hit me up. Let's hang out.
All right. That's really cool.
Yeah, and
I'm becoming the Seattle Northwest podcast.
Yeah, I just, last night I recorded a session with Scott Hoffman of the Dice of Thunder podcast. They're based out of Tacoma.
All right.
So that's another local group, but it's been fun trying to meet up and talk with other Seattle podcast people.
Well, yeah, let's talk about the big campaign. So I guess we already got kind of the out of character genesis for it, and I'm assuming that it's evolved over time from when you were, how old did you say you were, 18 or 19 when you first started DMing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm assuming it's evolved quite a bit over the last 25 years.
Yeah. No, we the first big campaign was very much your classic D&D 3.0, 3.5, starting with elves and dwarves and gnomes and wizards and players dealing with larger and larger things till they fight dragons and stuff like that. But as back then in those times with 3.0 and 3.5 putting out books all the time, it was very fun because new book would come out about every 3 months. And you might get some cool new ideas or have like, oh, cool, now I can change and make an adventure in somewhere else. And one day they put out the Epic Handbook.
Oh, yes.
And so looking at all my fun players who are about level 18, I started committing this book to memory. So when we hit 20th level, I could say, let's keep going. And so the first campaign went till the players, I think, were level 33.
Oh, God. Mine went to 24, and it felt like they were out of control.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, don't be wrong. It let me do some pretty ridiculous things, which was funny of, sure, why not have 14 Baelors attack the wizard?
Yeah, it does feel like at that point, like solving the encounter kind of isn't your problem anymore.
Right. Like, yeah, I'm not responsible for what happens once I say how many monsters. You guys should probably be able to solve that.
Yeah, and also part of like being that high level is like death is almost no consequence. You need to kill everyone in the party for it to matter.
Yeah, no, we had a session where I think a player died 3 times,
A session where a player died 3 times.
and it was in one combat.
Oh my god.
They charged, the bad guy hit him with like crit opportunity attack with a +6, human bane, flaming, critical, epic weapon, blah, 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 and just exploded their character. And the wizard's like, that's why I save it. That's why I save a wish, and snaps his fingers and rewinds time. So the person comes up back to life.
Right.
And they charged again. They're like, well, there's no way Jeph will roll 2 20s in a row again. And so I did. And then they died again. And the wizard's like, well, I'm going to turn back time. That's 10,000 experience and 2 wishes. Like, you're really killing me here, guys. And then the player got another couple rounds before they got crit on by the dragon, failed their save against the fire breath, and then the wizard rezzed them again. I was like, I'm out of wishes, man. Don't do it anymore, or you're staying down. But that's the silliness of Epic, right?
Yeah.
Those 15 Baelors were all killed in one round as the wizard used a heightened 9th level Whale of the Banshee. The 3-5 rules originally, the Baelors, when they explode, did an untyped damage, which means the immunity to fire that Baelors have doesn't stop Baelor blow up. Which means if you get 3 Baelors to explode, they will kill any other Baelors within 100 feet.
Oh, I didn't think of that part. Yeah, that's right. Because usually you're not using more than one. So they never thought about it.
Yeah, it was. I also didn't think about it at that time, but it was very entertaining for me as a DM to go, oh yeah, that totally works.
Yeah, I mean that was intentional at the time because like they had holy or unholy fire got around fire resistance, and it's the most unholy thing in the monster manual, so of course it gets around fire resistance, and well, there's unintended consequence.
Yeah, and so the wizard got to, in 6 seconds, wave his hand, and then it turns to I'd say visually it would look like an anime space battle scene, a record of Lotus War of just explosion, explosion, explosion as it scatters across, and it's like, cool. There's 14 less Baelors, and what do you guys want to do now? And they're like, well, we unlock the door and we walk into the house. I'm like, okay.
I was thinking of the V for Vendetta scene where he blows up the Old Bailey and there's just explosions that are going like up, up further.
Yes.
All right, so the big campaign in general has been in the same world, right?
So at the end of the first one, they reconstructed the plane, and then we stopped playing for a bit, and then I started the second game based on that world, but set further ahead in the future, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Give it a time gap, find a new theme and ideas for it. So first one dealt with gods. The second one, I got into more elemental theme, and the psionic books that started to come out. So
yes.
I was like, cool, let's do fun psychic speeder bikes and far realm monsters and lots of elemental themes to this. And we played that for, I think that game only ran for about 9 months before I decided to go do a little bit of a walkabout and then come back and started the third campaign, which set, of course, a little bit further on. That one, though, I decided to do something different. Instead of doing like a giant world, I just designed like one country. And just came up with a lot of lore for that one place.
And was this one place still set within the same campaign world or ambiguous?
Correct. Yeah, no, it's still everything's still built on the original first game world. And in fact, that's actually where the podcast takes place, is this world, this country I made for the third campaign.
Okay.
That's where we started getting into more, I wouldn't say quite modern, but like we're not at industrial age, but we had cities, we had Lich Kings, we had a little bit more of the political bend to it, of like the players started unable to read and had to actually spend points to learn to read.
Ooh.
There was no arcane magic allowed and things like that. A lot of small tweaks and changes to make that world feel more to feel different, right? As I start to grow as a DM, start feeling more comfortable just designing all my own stuff. And yeah, so the players spent their time going through that world, fighting against these mechanical lich rulers of the country until they'd killed off most of them, saved the people, and we move on to the next game.
Sorry, did you say like the villains won? They killed off most of the people?
No, the players killed off all the liches, but they still ran into the issue of like, well, we're not heroes that are built for like political stuff. We're
Okay,
paladins
yes.
and rangers and things. So I hope the world's okay. And then that's where y'all just kind of say like, okay, well, this feels like a good end to the game. The Lich Kings are all dead. The robot liches are all dead except for one of them. Let's stop and I'll start working on what happens next.
I see. There had been too much damage done, so the world went to shit.
Yeah.
All right.
Fourth game dealt with a lot more industry. Fifth game, I think, is where we actually introduced guns, and where we introduced, for our game, the plane of the constant, which is a plane of information, which is now kind of accepted as basically the internet.
Okay, so this isn't Mechanist like a plane of law. This is cyberspace.
Yeah, one of the high-level players, there's a psionic ability that says, like, create demi-plane.
Right.
You can Genesis, you can create a
Yep.
plane.
Yep.
And so the player wanted to create something that would help future games. And so they're like, cool, I'm going to invest all my points and use all these psionic powers to make a plane of information that people can access. And so that's what kind of led to our current games of their cell phones and data pads and computers, because people are tapping in that plane to share information.
Oh, okay. So all those devices that do our like future tech stuff are actually sort of planar gates?
Yeah. It's as my world has less and less gods, a kind of way to use that divine magic, like divination and things like that, are kind of you searching the web, right? Trying to inquire, you're asking questions of the internet, and if you roll well enough, then maybe you get a good answer back. If not, you get bad information.
I gotta roll my Google skill check. Okay, that's a cool way of handling that, like the magic tech kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the world at this point is kind of at the same technology level that we're at currently in some respects.
The podcast is my home game is set actually in Big Campaign 8, and so we're dealing a bit more with more advanced tech, more cybernetics, and more people having like direct connections to the constant now. We're also dealing with ramifications of some world stuff that happened, destruction of a few different planes, and their connections to the elements are starting to go away. So the world's becoming less magical to some extent, or magic's getting very skewed, right? There's no connection now to the fire plane or earth plane, so the spells are just off people's rosters, which has given the air and water connections more power, as there's no one to oppose them.
And you said you're using Pathfinder. Do you have the metal and wood planes as well then?
I do not have the metal and wood planes. I am using Pathfinder 1E.
Okay, those are from 2. That's right.
But those sound cool. Like, I will have to read up on those.
It was an attempt to try and include the Chinese elemental system, which has 5 elements of earth, water, fire, wood, and metal.
Oh, okay.
And not air, because air is sort of a absence of anything was the idea. So they brought in the wood and metal elements because those are part of the Chinese elemental system. And then you can sort of still build the elemental system however you want with those now 6. Although I think the only class that interacted with it was forgetting the name of it, the Elementalist or Invoker or something.
There was the Kineticist.
That's it, yes, thank you, Kineticist.
Okay.
Anyways, yeah, 1E. So you're using the standard European 4-element thing, but fire and earth are locked because they're dying or something.
For what was it? In the first campaign, the players had used their epic magics as 30th level characters to reconnect the plane all back together, and they kind of used, to screw it back together, large connections to the planes. So they had a air, fire, earth, water that in the seventh game, because of events because of things of, or sorry, because people were using those elements in ways that were dangerous, governments ended up destroying a few of those ancient pillars made by those god players forever ago, which has thrown off the ley lines and balance of the world. So no longer with fire access, the water pillar is still able to produce, but with nothing to oppose it, we're seeing more aquatic creature problems and more larger storms and more world stuff.
Yeah, it's like the ocean level is rising kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
You brought in global climate change.
I did.
I'm curious how the lack of fire would also work. Does that mean everything is getting colder? Are you still able to like light fires, or like electricity is also usually combined in there? What are the effects of that?
So technology still functions fine. That information going through the constant, it has a place to draw from.
Mm-hmm. And it's not really electricity, right? It's some other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Just, yeah, more of I think I just kind of put it in my head as kind of like an ether, right? Kind of I guess what the easiest way to represent is like the energy. If you ever played Magic the Gathering, they have a set that took place on, what was that? Kaladesh. Yeah.
Yes, Kaladesh.
Yeah, so think of like Kaladesh, like you can see those patterns in the lands, and you can see how Aether just kind of infuses everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's where like technology works fine. And I've told players if somebody wants to play a fire sorcerer, that's fine. We'd say that you have a direct connection with fire, and that's why you can do it. But for your standard clerics, wizards, druids, even.
Oh yeah, druids do a lot of fire magic. That's right.
Yeah, fire is not an element you can tap into anymore.
All right, so if you wanted it to be the focus for your character, we'd say, okay, then it works for you because you have a special fire stick that works for you. But for the most part, fire and earth spells just don't work.
Correct. Yeah, they're not on your list. You just don't have them. Pick a new spell.
And sort of assuming that you'd be able to pick a water or an air spell to replace it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I said, for people who's like, oh well, I still want to take fireball. I'm like, that's fine. It just can't make fire. So if we'd like to say it's a, condensed, an implosion ball of air, we can do that. That's fine. But you do not make that element. Like I'm not. I don't want to take away anything from them per se, but to keep with the theme, you can still have all of your spells. They just can't produce fire.
I wonder how that works for Fire Shield, because that one's always been sort of nebulous whether it's fire or ice with how it's functioning.
I do remember in the 3.5 books there was, I think it was one of the later books that talked about like the Duskblade and some of those classes, and they introduced alternate fire shields. So like there was like an acid shield and a cold shield as well. So
okay,
for something like that, it'd be like, all right, cool. You could take water shield, and it protects against fire. So it's a cool thing to do if the house is on fire and you need to go and save somebody. Cast water shield, and you'll have resistance.
And how does this work for fire creatures like red dragons?
Honestly, in my world, I only have 4 dragons in my world.
Oh, okay. So these are like the 4 like they have names and they're like almost like gods kind of thing.
Correct. Yeah, there are the 4 dragons that survived the world being put back together from the first big campaign.
Okay. I
generally try not to use too many creatures that would break the theme or ambiance. If I see a cool fire creature, I'm like, well, I really want to use it. I'll try to look at like, can I turn this into sand? Can I reskin this monster in a way that lets me use it without putting the players in that awkward place of, oh, here comes a monster that can only hurt by fire, but nobody has fire.
Yeah. I was more thinking like a dragon I would think maybe get sick because its fire connection doesn't work as well anymore. Because I feel like a lot of fire creatures in D&D are elemental in some way, and I guess dragons are too, but they're supposed to be like quasi-natural, like native to the material plane.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think for a dragon, I would probably let them just have it. Because I like the idea of the dragon produces its own fire, and it's not, pulling from the fire plane, or, even though these are titanic creatures that have obviously innate magical powers, if I'm going to give the sorcerer fire powers, I'll just give the dragon fire powers.
Have you seen the like National Geographic dragon documentary?
Uh, no, but that sounds rad.
Yeah, it was where they were trying to come up with like logical explanations for how dragons could fly and breathe fire. And it was that they had like a hydrogen synthesis organ. So they had like a little hydrogen bladder inside of them that made them light enough to fly with their wings.
Okay.
And then dragons also would consume platinum that they would store in like a gobble, I don't know, something like that. Gizzard. It had a little section in its throat to store the platinum rocks that it would eat. Platinum, when it reacts with hydrogen, burns.
Oh, neat.
So when they breathe fire, they would expel like hydrogen from their hydrogen bladder, have it go across the platinum rocks in their little platinum rock pouch up by their mouth, and out comes fire. So it had explanations, but it also was like, a documentary. Here we're gonna follow this dragon from when it's a little hatches as an egg, and here's its mother bringing its food, and it has to teach the little baby how to hunt on its own, and then the mother dies somehow, and now the baby's all on its own, and it has to fight for like platinum rock territory because it like all the dragons want the platinum rock territory because that's like their hunting and their defense mechanism is through platinum.
I absolutely love that. I think that's some great world building. I feel like it just feels cool, and makes sense why you'd have dragons would need to hoard wealth, right? If it's tied in with their natural defenses and how they work, then yeah, that's fun. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, and if you're a Next Gen fan, it's all narrated by Patrick Stewart. Yeah, I love that documentary. It's really cool. I think it's all on YouTube because it's old enough that National Geographic doesn't care anymore.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I'll definitely look.
Yeah, I would definitely
look that up
recommend it
this weekend.
Yeah, you don't want to see it on my old junky VHS tape that I have. But find a better copy. Anyways, yeah, I was just like thinking about like the science of dragons, like within a conception of magic with planes. Then there's this other alternate, like here's how they would work in the real world set of rules. Man, well, yeah, back to your campaign.
Yeah.
So you have this enormous amount of history for it. How have you been like tracking that to make sure you're not missing anything or getting something wrong, or are you tracking it?
I've given myself a bit of leeway of just how history works, right? You have unreliable narrators, things can go wrong, or people just get forgotten. So I try my best to make sure all the lines and threads still keep up. But the world's changed enough now that there's a lot of that lore where I just really need to remember locations. And if something like really auspicious happened there, right? If this is the site where that paladin smote that one gigantic acid demon monster, cool, maybe put a fun flare of like while the players are driving across this desert, you hit the small oasis, but the sand here burns your skin. Just so the one player is like, oh yeah, it'd be campaign 2, that's where I fought that acid demon. Neat. So I enjoy finding ways to tuck Easter eggs in from previous campaigns for those players.
Yeah, that's cool. But you don't have like a big old binder or document?
No, I don't have a binder, but yes, I did switch. I guess actually, honestly, I started with a binder, realized that's a lot of handwriting. And then once appropriate, I switched over to Google Docs. And now I have just folders filled with notes, histories, old ideas, some that never paid off, things I never got around to using. And so I just have it all in one place. I'm also pretty lucky because I have a very fun player who, at the end of every campaign, likes to take all my notes and look through them and organize them a bit. So I kind of have a friend who is my historian.
Ah, nice. You have a amateur
Yes.
archivist.
So that's been fun. Of just giving them access at the end of a campaign. Here's all the Google Docs. Go ahead and go crazy, man. Take a look at it. I think he has my original handwritten binder. Yeah, all my original handwritten notes from previous ones.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, yeah, let's talk about what your world like is on a physical level. So as it's maintained the same basic shape of like the continents and the cultures being in specific places, even though it has evolved or had like smaller focuses over time.
Yeah, let's see here. The plane itself, think like a half dome, that has since been finally completed into a full round plane, but shaped more like a teardrop. There is a portion of the plane that is infinite and extends out into the astral plane. A lot of
Okay.
continents, ocean, and the custom races I started bringing in the second big campaign, and at first they all had.
So the teardrop
Yeah.
shape, just to make sure I'm understanding this right. So like the sort of section that's extending into the astral plane is the top of the teardrop. Is
Um,
that right?
y- yes, yeah, you could definitely. Yeah, there's an as described. There's like an infinite glass ocean that comes from just one country, and so like you look at the plane as a whole, and it's just a big sphere at this point. But that one spot would give that extending into the foreverness of the astral plane.
Okay. Gotcha. You were talking about races. Yes.
Yeah, so custom races. So yeah, at first I definitely had a lot of the, this section belongs to the Illican, and this one belongs to these gnomes, and this one belongs to these people. But as the game kept going, it became more fun just to make it more multicultural. And so I stopped having any one race have cultural elements, and I started writing for all my games cultural based on the location. So that way the
Uh-huh.
players, when they build their characters, they pick whatever race, you pick the location. There's very thematically themed flavored backgrounds for various important roles around the world, but none of it's gate kept by any specific race or group. So that way you can have a little bit more fun with NPCs and not have to worry about the fish out of water stories, right? The one person's like, "Well, I'm a 10-foot tall Mothman." It's like, we don't get a lot of you around
Uh-huh.
here.
Yeah. Or just the popular dark elf trope that people
Correct.
have.
Yeah. And so I was just like, now, because I did read all those R.A. Salvatore books. Uh,
Yes.
by the time I think Artemis Entreri finally passed away, I was like, well, cool, but I don't want to do that. Let's hey, that's a 10-foot tall Mothman that's our local baker, and he makes great donuts. And there's our brewery
Yeah.
master, which is that lizard guy. Um, and they should just be normal parts, and that gnome drives the bus.
And I feel like Pathfinder has been encouraging that in the second edition rules as well. So I feel like there must be some support for it in
Oh
first
yeah,
edition.
you can definitely see, or you can definitely track the evolution of Pathfinder 1e, where it starts as a 3.035 clone, but within probably the first 7 or 8 books, really starts to understand it has a chance to be different and potentially better. And as they kind of keep expanding, more cool ideas kind of start to come to the front until Pathfinder 1e finished, and they brought a lot of that really good stuff to 2e, which I'll be really honest for anyone listening. I believe 2e is a better system. I think it's super cool. I like all the stuff in it. I just enjoy how well I know 1e and my ability to customize and modify at a whim. And so that's my preferred rule set to just kind of have.
Yeah, no, I get it. I used third edition for a very long time, until I felt like I tried everything I wanted to do within the system with all the different fiddly bits to it.
Mm-hmm.
And Pathfinder just took the number of knobs and levers you have for character creation and multiplied them by like 3 or 4 compared to 3.5. So yes, there's a lot of choices that you have that can feel very impactful when you stumble on some little combo that creates a whole new interaction for your character.
And it's why I tell anybody who sits down at our table or even guests on the podcast of, hey, if you haven't made a Pathfinder character before, don't look at anything. Tell me what you want to build, and I'll help you build that. Because a lot of people end up going, my goodness, when they see there's like over 1,000 feats to pick from, and 400 traits, and here's your class. And they're like, oh, so there's a class and an archetype? I'm like, and you can have an archetype. You can combine multiple archetypes as long as they don't roll over the same powers. You can do multi-classing with archetypes on top of variant multi-classing with those archetypes. And it's like, there's too many things. What do you want to make? You want to make John Wick? We can make John Wick. Not a problem.
The favorite one I did is there was a prestige class in 3.5 that was, like they had a couple of prestige classes that were like a combo where like you progress as like a wizard and a cleric, that kind of thing. So there was one where you progressed as a arcane spellcaster and as a monk.
Oh.
And they came out with rules where you could progress as a warlock and as if you were an arcane spellcaster. So I used that along with the monk to make a Dragon Ball Z character.
I love it. Awesome.
Yeah, so the Eldritch Blast was the key blast thing, and punches were still just punches. That was a fun one.
No, that's a perfect place for it. Warlock is a very interesting class that I wish Pathfinder would have maybe attempted. Kineticist is about as close as we get.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But Kineticist definitely already starts and kind of walks in with that very Avatar: The Last Airbender flair or feel to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It is. You are an elemental wizard, and the warlock feel was like you are the bargain, the pact. You're made some terrible promise in order to gain power.
Yeah, and I think it's a cool class, but it's also kind of a weird one, right? Like, you run into that problem of, well, how is this different than the cleric? Of that, like, you've made a weird dark pact with this strange thing.
Oh, yes. You have a cleric that's made it's a sponsored pact that has official rules. It's not some under the table deal, I guess.
And so just makes you think of those like forced ads, those like, this sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends, or like that's your cleric versus your warlock is wearing the sandwich outfit and having to spin a sign outside.
Yeah, it's got the cheap version. Okay, yeah. So the world that you have, can you give like, I mean, we talked about the history of like the campaigns, I guess, and what's more of like the in-universe history. So I know that you've had like planar conflict elements, and I guess these are kind of defined by the campaigns and what happened in between them. But can you give us a rundown on that?
Yeah, I should be able to. Let's see here. Easy world history right now. So, Big Campaign 1 was the deific era. The players became gods, killed some of the older gods, restored their plane back into a livable state, and bound it all together with the elemental pillars and a big old world tree, because everybody likes a world tree.
Yeah, you do have the wood element. You lied.
So that led to the second era, which is where I introduced a super giant Cthulhu-esque level big bad named Zeldoric. And Zeldoric sits at the end of reality, locked away by the other elder deities, but his influence is starting to creep in after the players from the first one, as they had taken the spots of gods. There was less defense to keep the monster creature out. And so this is where we start bringing the corrupting influence of the far realm, and the horrific things beyond reality, right?
Okay.
This leads to the collapse of a lot of cities. It brings in the strange marks of corruption that players are able to use advance and kind of tap into that far realm power. Kind of everybody got a little bit of that little warlock treat. Third big campaign is the rise of the robot liches, which are the last wizards. They became the robot liches, kind of locked away all arcane magic, so that nobody else could achieve what they did. They also led towards the revolts that burned books and destroyed a lot of knowledge. So this let me kind of give the previous two campaigns this kind of air of mystery, right? Like, you need a history check if you want to know what happened a campaign ago. And so the players defeated those lich gods and set out into the world, and that's where we start to see the expansion from what was an almost entirely human-only game. Is where I was able to also introduce some of the fun races that were kind of ignored between the second and fourth game. So the fourth game dealt with the destruction of the world tree, and some of the ramifications from the first campaign of, like, the wizard. What is it? The person who played the wizard god went to the mirror plane and then fought himself, but he turned himself into a cat and then left. So lore-wise,
very cat-like.
Yeah, the evil cat, the 32 intelligence evil cat, because he was a mirror plane, right? It's a reflection of that character. He was neutral good, so this is a neutral evil genius 27th level cat wizard.
Okay.
But we kind of played with the lore of, like, oh, normally when you leave the mirror plane, your reflection goes away. But since you turned them into a cat, they aren't reflecting you anymore. So this super intelligent, hyper intelligent, extra evil cat had been slowly sitting and plotting on the mirror realm until it escaped into 4. So I got to have, like, some bad guys with a black cat on their lap. And I think one of the players finally realized, like, I think the cat's the real bad guy.
This reminds me of the Star Trek Next Gen again, of when Moriarty escaped the holodeck.
I need to watch Star Trek Next Gen. I never really watched it growing up as a kid. Moving a lot, I just didn't get around
it. There's an episode where Data, the android character, has, like, this obsession with Sherlock Holmes. So they try sort of designing a Sherlock Holmes adventure for him to do within the holodeck. But the holodeck is just, like, sort of doing AI generation, so it's taking bits and pieces of the Arthur Conan Doyle stories and turning them into a mystery. But Data has read all of the books, so instantly recognizes the, like, different things that they're putting and recognizes how it's combining together. So then they ask the holodeck to create a mystery that will challenge Data instead of challenge Sherlock Holmes. And the only way to challenge Data is to create a villain that is sentient of their existence as a fictional character and then trying to escape
that. My goodness, that's awesome. All right, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah, I'm sure if you Google, like, Sherlock Holmes, Moriarty, Star Trek, you'll find it.
I'll watch some clips of that.
Yeah, it's a great episode.
So Evil Black Cat, the players, the Evil Black Cat finally gets turned back into a human, now driven a little bit mad, being stuck on the mirror plane as a cat for so long, and also kind of come back with just the chaotic evil villain of, I want to destroy everything the wizard who locked me away did. So I'm going to blow up the world tree and I'm going to destroy the plane, because he put it all back together. And he didn't destroy the plane, but he did summon the sphere of annihilation to destroy the world tree. And this was one of my favorite parts is, players make choices. And one of the players made the choice of, cool, I'm within range to do a charge, superpower attack, all my chickens, one basket, so many marbles, 200-point hit damage, or I can stop this orb of annihilation. And so they killed the wizard instead, as the orb crashed into the world tree and removed it and destroyed it, leaving a permanent scar on the world for campaigns to come. And yeah, that's where that campaign ended. So we get to Big Campaigns 5 and 6, where we start to touch on the industrial era with the World Tree gone. Magic only really runs on ley lines, so certain places have more magic than others, which means things like technology had to start coming up because your average person was kind of getting shafted by, monsters that walk around and things like that. I started to play heavier into time themes and alternate dimensions in this one. And so players were kind of like rebuilding broken parts of gods from previous campaigns that were killed. And this is where we started a little bit into, so this is where we started to deal more with a lot of planar effects. This campaign was really interesting because I never had so many players take so many knowledges. Like even the fighters on average had plus 15 to their knowledge checks. Because everybody wanted to know everything they could. And so then this is the campaign that, as it ended, we had an amazing standoff between 4 players of who's going to control this, basically the crown of the elder deity that locked away the Cthulhu monster brought up in the second one. And each player, all the players are, I should have it for this reason, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to edit reality so that this doesn't exist. And other players like, well, I want to do this. I want to use it, and I'm going to edit reality so that we have this power. And another.
This is really cool that you keep having like these important artifacts and places and like pillars of reality that are created in previous campaigns by your players and then coming back in subsequent campaigns. So it feels like their characters their past PCs are like real historical figures that they're interacting with the shadows of from when they left behind.
Yeah, I'm a huge Dune nerd. And so this gives me a chance to kind of have my Dune and eat it too, right? Like, I get to play around with these long epic scopes of time and how the world changes, but also I really love giving my players the options to like, I built this Lego castle and then they break it and they make cars out of it. And I'm like, sweet, we're doing a race car campaign then.
All right.
But yeah, so funny enough, they're arguing over who's going to control the crown of the elder gods and what will happen next and who's going to do this. And so the players get into of course, competition, right? Who's going to take advantage of this? Who's going to exert more control? This led to, I think somebody finally rolled like 108 on a knowledge check with all of their modifiers to try to like take control of it. But all of this was, of course, all for naught, as the player who eventually makes the internet plane, used a mythic power which said you can touch any item, take all the magic and power out of it, and then transfer it to a different item or person and touch them. While the 20th level Scion was arguing with the 20th level Magus, which was arguing with the 20th level Bard over how they were going to define reality, the 20th level Ranger decided to go outside and chop up some wood so the nerds don't get cold while they argue. And by the time he got back, all of them are ready to fight each other over to see who controls all of reality. And the Scion used that power and just made the Ranger into the living crown of the elder gods. And he's like, this is the only dude I've known my entire existence that's actually been a good guy, so I don't think anyone should have it. You're the crown now, bro. Go fix reality.
Give power to someone who doesn't want it. They'll use it.
Yeah, and so that's where his character ended up becoming he put the world back to how it was supposed to be before anyone tried to edit anything. He stopped a fight between a couple elder gods before he went and filled in the hole left in from the first campaign of nobody stopping Zeldoric from being able to break through. So the Big Campaign 1 quest finally gets finished in Big Campaign 5 for the history of the world. So in 6, Mechanus attacked the plane because at this point the plane had shown, between their manipulation of elder gods and artifacts, that they were a dangerous element in the world. This led to this campaign being heavily focused on destroying Mechanus. That was the campaign I mentioned that I had three groups of 6 players each. And so one group stayed on plane, picking up bits and parts of, what is it? I think I use them as like motes or gears, representations of mechanics trying to meta-wise like alter the world to confine that plane to like a prison plane. And so the players could find like small gears and broken parts of reality that mechanics had done, and they could kind of turn them in. So I kind of turned this a little bit into a game for the groups of, if you find one of these shards, you have one of three options you can do. You can raise the level cap of the game, and Big Campaign 6 we did as an Epic 6 campaign. So 6th level is the highest you could go.
Right.
So you could raise the level cap for everyone in all the groups. You could reset your group back to level 1 and then Gestalt. Or one person could gain a rank of Mythic. So the players had a lot of fun. Different groups were like, we're going to be tri-stalted now. Another group's like, we're going to keep raising the level cap. And so this let me introduce a lot more crazy reality stuff. We had the gears going on, and players got a couple of wishes. And because of this whole Mechanus war, they made a wish saying, cool, Mechanus has placed us so that we're all bound to this lower level. This is now going to become a planar law. If you're on our plane, you have our level cap. Which meant that like a lot of big monsters were really scary when they left the plane. But your Balor, when he shows up on plane, drops down to 6 hit die effectively. So it gave the players a lot of fun places to work with, like guns and non-magic stuff, to be able to fight bigger monsters, because they're now limited by the same rules. With the destruction of Mechanus, as one of the groups became the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, another group ended up killing one of the elder deities, the other 2 groups killed the other 2 elder deities. We go into Big Campaign 7, which is where now we have internet, we have guns, we have cell phones. People use Hedron kind of flying ships, and your kind of standard 1980s retro future kind of hover cars. In this one, I ran that campaign very much of kind of Avengers, Men in Black. The players were all part of a group called Prism, the Planar Resource Incident something management.
Okay.
And so the players all got missions, and I did this one fun in a way. I was able to use, this was my first time like really using Facebook as a place to coordinate games before I knew Discord was a thing. So I'd write up 5 missions. Players would all get to vote on what mission they wanted to go on. Every mission that they didn't choose would all go up 1 star rating. If anything got to 3 star ratings, it would become more difficult. If it ever got to 2 star ratings, it pretty much guaranteed somebody might die in that session. So the players were running all over the world. And that one I also ran I believe the style is called Western Marches. So I would just post like, hey, there's a 4-person mission. We'll play this Friday. Whoever can make it gets to play. Whoever can't, we'll get you next time. So I had to make a big Excel spreadsheet where I kept track of who played last, when the last person played. And so we had rotating chairs for various missions based on, if you had played, if nobody can make it, and things like that. We played that one for actually quite a while, dealing with some of the ramifications from previous games. Of course, right? Fallout from the one guy who tried to edit reality. He chopped a few people out that finally came back. We saw some infernal creatures kind of coming into play. We see here kind of the effects of Seldoric, the creature that's locked beyond the gate. Had broken through in a few spots, and so this is where we used larger kind of corrupt, weird gods or corrupt versions of gods that used to exist. The players spent their time like trying to defend the plane from this, and not doing with a lot of street level stuff, not doing with human interaction stuff. It's mostly like, okay, everybody, we got to stop. There's a planar breach that's currently letting loose chaos all over this desert. We need one part of the group has to go shut down the breach. We need another people to like containment, fight these monsters, and stuff like that. Right. So first season is they did this, and I kind of ended that first season with the world governments kind of deciding after a while that Prism was too powerful and putting everyone down that they could. So the players kind of got to make new characters for the second one, and those that wanted to keep their old characters around could, but they kind of wandered around kind of as mentors, more NPCs. So that, and this game was all Epic 10. And so the second part of it was, new characters. They want to go fight those governments, of course, but you can't be this extrajudicial, super-powered vigilante team without creating issues and problems, right? So yeah, they fought some remnants of Mechanus. They fought other governments, and we finally see one of the Bardic player is able to finally cast their final spell to protect the plane from outside threats, which gets our heroes finally to the end of 7, where all of the best ones from Prism all got effectively in their spaceship to launch to the end of the universe to finally go kill Zeldoric. And that ends with triple question marks because they launched off into space. We never got around to finishing whether they defeated him or not, because a couple players had to drop and some life stuff happened and people, and COVID, of course,
Oh, right.
Which, yeah, with the ending of that, let me wander into where I'm now playing in Big Campaign 8. The Mechanus is gone. The prime celestial plane is gone. The infinite layers of the abyss is gone. They've broken those pillars that connected them to the elemental energies, except for a couple. With ley lines broken, there's not as much magic. They've lost their flying cars and ships, so there's a little bit more of a Mad Maxy feel. My players all said they wanted me to make this harder. So with the lack of magic, that means there's no real permanent magic items. Potions don't last more than 24 hours. There's no +1 swords. You can have better masterwork guns. You can make better masterwork weapons, and you can use a spell to enchant them if you have that. But there's not like permanent magic items anymore. And yeah, that's 8 versions of the world duct taped on top of each other over and over.
Yeah, like I said, it's this really cool thing to have it, like having your players be able to interact with all of these ancient pieces that were created by, maybe not them specifically, but other players within the world. It's a really neat experience.
What's been very fun about it is getting new players in. They've always really enjoyed the game because the world feels very complex and layered and stuff. But what's really fun is when they find history or get history stuff without knowing it came from another player. And so they start to like dig into it, and they keep finding more and more information. And they're like, wow, this is so interesting on this. And it's like, oh yeah, you can also just talk to that guy right over there. That's based on his character. And all the stuff you're finding out is all of the things he did. And they're usually like, wow, that's insane. So what about this thing? It's like, yeah, I'm very lucky. I have a lot of very creative and wonderful players. They're great friends and I love having them around. And they just help me make my game a lot more fun by breaking my world over and over again and helping me duct tape it back together.
What's your experience with Ben building it, like little pancake style, whatever you would call it here, duct tape?
I mean, I really enjoy world building. I think it's one of the coolest parts of kind of being a storyteller is seeing how, can you make a world that looks kind of how you'd like it? Or, even if you don't agree with that world, how would you represent, late stage capitalism in a world with magic where you can just make food or water or things like that? How do you introduce the idea of scarcity in these things? And I love sitting down and figuring out designs for, I do a lot of drawing of races and characters and to kind of get in my head of how I want my world to look and feel. So like I have sketchbooks all over just filled with random drawings of like, if I want to design outfits or colors, or does this look cool? So when I describe it to my players, I can give them as much description, but I can show them a drawing as well. And I really like taking all the weird monsters and all the weird things and coming up with the ecosystems. World building as I think world building is my favorite part about DMing. The stories just help me world build more, though.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I feel like I don't have much to add. It sounds really cool. That's all I got. Um, well, yeah. Let's talk a bit more about the world. In not in the sort of shared creation of it, but like what it's like now. Um, so your current campaign is focusing on a specific location. Maybe we should start there and we can expand outwards.
So the 8th campaign, the one I'm doing for my home game, is taking place across the entire world of Zelanis. So I have the United Zerain Empire, I have the Vitharian Consortium, the Novalmites as kind of the larger 3 factions. So the first one, the United Zerain Empire, is from the 3rd campaign of that city focused game, or that country focused game.
Uh-huh.
This is now that country in full go. So there's militaristic aspects to it. They're competing with the other empires for Hedron resources to be able to build flying ships, which are rare because in the previous game, somebody when the fire pillar was used and destroyed, it destroyed their access to Hedron, which is your standard MacGuffin magic material that gives you flying ships and flying cars. With that taken away, Hedron can only be really mined through extraplanar means. So occasionally when it falls to plane, that's where the empires fight over it. My players kind of are still dealing with the expansion and now kind of the really corruption of larger kind of corporate entities. One group is right now finding out that the pharmaceutical company they worked for has been doing live experiments on different races in the world, and is now dedicated to trying to take them down, while the other group is dealing with military controlled borders of or military controlled territories between the empires as they fight. And all of this, of course, with a background of a crazy group of religious fundamentalists from a previous campaign that still believe in those old liches, is kind of coming around of being able to repair one of the pillars, the air pillar, but with their own gods. So they are the group that's starting to expand, and they're the only ones that have air magic.
Okay, that's a pretty unique power. But I also feel like in at least 3.5, I don't know if Pathfinder changed this, air magic wasn't very useful.
It's not as handy for combat stuff, but with getting rid of like a lot of the magic material, like it gives them a pretty strong advantage for like using wind-powered ships and taking out other flying ships, because just being able to be like some of those spells where it's like, oh, you make a flying creature drop to the ground, not that great. But if you do it on a ship filled with people that's flying and that boat just goes slamming downwards, that's pretty much an insta-win.
Yeah. I thought those spells were earth spells.
I know there's one with air where you basically create a vacuum, you remove all the air in a location.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, things like that, like those kind of weird fringe spells that most people never touch on, become really interesting when you kind of have to use those, or it's, yeah, not have to, but those are the ones you have access to. So it's been really fun watching my players come up with really creative ways to do weird stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, as far as this game, the feel of the world is very much them doing a lot of driving. There's elemental storms created by the lack of the pillars that they have to deal with. It is colder now. Different areas are, as the water energy source continues to expand, they're noticing, oceans rising, more snow happening, more natural storms in weird spaces that are stronger than they should be, kind of things.
Right. You already mentioned like the culture a bit, and the races are fairly integrated at this point in your campaign's history, so there isn't much going on there. So do the different nations feel very like sort of homogenous culturally, or are there like different pockets of stuff within them?
I try to keep the different sections so that they have their kind of feel to them. So was it racially everyone's on that equal level? There's not too much of that, though. I still have um, those older cultures from previous campaigns that I touch into that give players kind of an idea of like, oh, my dad's a traditionalist. He still wears the 7 hats, and they're like, ah, okay, that makes sense. Because one of our races, one of the players, and this is a great example of one of my players thought it'd be really fun if his gnome guy wore a hat for every level they had.
Okay.
And at first it was kind of a doofy joke, and we all laughed with it, and I think it was in the second game. But then as we kind of kept going with it, it became a cultural standpoint for them. So if you met a Lycal and they had, 3 different chef hats all kind of sewn together, they're a fairly high up, Lycal, or the very talented gnome that knows how to do this. To the point where my players would be like, okay, we're spying on this area, and you see this gnome wearing an 8-tiered hat, and they're like, oh my god, that thing's gonna kill us. An 8-tiered hat? That guy must be a complete badass. Yeah.
My god.
And it's so it's stuff like that. What is it? One of the custom races for my world, the Illican, which are effectively the genetic experience of the mind flayers that wanted to survive the apocalypse at the end of the first campaign, made this race of the Illican. They're part drow, part human, part mind flayer. They all kind of look like the little guys from like Abe's Odyssey, if you remember those. Yeah, if you ever played that game on PlayStation way back when. But
No, I don't think I did that
but they
one.
were made so that when the mind flayers eventually woke up from their sleep and torpor after the universe had been put back together, they could eat them and learn what they missed. So small fun thing is every one of them, their brain's a sponge, effectively designed for remembering stuff that they don't necessarily remember. But when the mind flayer eats them, they're like, okay, cool. I know the last 80 years of history that this guy experienced.
Okay.
But we will do some fun things of making their culture of they were designed to survive an apocalypse, so they can eat anything they want. They can survive anywhere, eat dirt if they have to. But they really, to play into that mind flayer side, one of my players decided that his character as an Illican really enjoyed eating raw eggs because it reminded him of that mind flayer genetic memory of breaking into a skull to eat a brain. So
Okay.
that became kind of thing is they carries around some raw eggs, cracks the egg, and slurps out the insides. And that's just a light treat that these people use. And so as the game kind of kept going, Illican to have a lot of egg recipes for stuff.
I feel like a soft-boiled egg would be better for that, but whatever.
But yeah, I try to bring those elements in and of making those cultures still be there so that the cities feel different based on kind of course, who's there, but you can still have, a human with a 5-tiered hat. And someone will be like, okay, well, that guy must have been trained by these people, or maybe it's just a history buff who likes these things. And yeah, I think because the amount of history I have, I get to avoid a little bit of the homogenization of everything, because I do get to play on like, oh, you're from the city of Reprise that used to be known as the city of Summit's Nest, but it was destroyed during that Mechanus attack and rebuilt. And so like the architecture here was done by Inevitables. And so the city feels really well put together, even though it's not a big city. Stuff like that. So like the history allows me to prevent the world from feeling all the same.
Right. Yeah, there's so many different pieces you can pull in to make it feel different and still recognizable to the players, or at least yourself, and being able to communicate that stuff to your players. That's neat.
Yeah, so it's a lot of fun designing because I feel like I get a lot of places to pull from in making sure like those locations don't feel the same because of those histories. And then players, of course, well, players going to play until the next campaign, and we'll see how they look different then.
So what's the world like on a physical level? Is it like, 5, 6 continents? What's the deal there?
Yeah,
You said it was teardrop shaped, but a little more than that.
so that's shape of the plane. Let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are 7 continents. The largest one being Corellia, think something very South American. Large mountain in the middle, lots of wilderness, forests. You know, a place for like little electric shocker lizards. They eat large eels, but they're a large export import for trees, wood, and they have a lot of unique monsters for that area. So that would be the largest continent on the west side of the world, effectively. As we go further to the east, we have the northern parts that are the northern continent, which is the second largest one, called Dom Vog. That one's split in half by a mountain range, which on the back end is God's Face, where the Vithdarin consortium is from, that empire, and that's where I kind of have more technology focus. So mechs, trains, those sort of things. But all of it's kind of a deserty plateau. And that's where the Glass Sea is, at the back end of that.
Okay.
So the outside of that is where we get into more kind of like wheat plains, more pine barrens, less extremes, but we have, train tracks running throughout the world, going between cities, mountain ranges. This is where we see like Core Junction, which is the capital of this northern continent. This was where the main Mechanist forces landed and used as their base of operations. Now that it's gone, now that Mechanist is gone, it's basically as my players really like to think about it, as like the best city, with it being maintained correctly. It was built by hyper logical creatures of law that wanted the city to be able to run well, so it's designed in such a way that it doesn't have traffic problems. Trains always run on time there. Buildings, housing are built into all that stuff. So that the northern continent is pretty basic. The far east, we have the 2 sister continents, Loreth and Zoran. Loreth is mostly desert in the middle of it. The northern part is because the pharmaceutical companies now have started making their own jungles to grow new materials, plants, and genetically formed monsters.
Okay.
The sister continent Zoran is where the United Zoran Empire is. That's where all the various houses are. That used to be the place controlled by the liches. That's the place where you'd imagine your future dystopia, right? They have the big walls that protect it from everybody else. Everybody inside is living pretty well. Food's produced, grown, all inside locally. But this is where you get your giant skyscrapers, your overbearing city, your concrete everywhere, your glass kind of stuff. In the middle of this, we have our 2 islands, Chinovos and Mon. Chinovos is where our religious zealots come from, the ones that are rebuilding the air pillar to function, but with their gods and with their beliefs. Mon is the Verdant Isles, is the main part of the Verdant Isles, which is where kind of became our Druid / Jurassic Park / here's where there's a lot of like crazy and larger monsters, but a lot of them hibernate. So, what season is it? Is it Bandersnatch season? Is it Bullet season? What huge thing or what crazy monsters out here at this time, and that's kind of how you keep track of things. And all of this, of course, in the very south, there's a giant broken part of the world that's covered over with Acanthian, which is the pressurized frozen ice from the river Styx, that makes this large crack and scar in the world, where the world tree used to be.
And do all these different places in the world have access to the plane of knowledge with all of the devices and sort of cyberpunk tech that comes with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, every plane has access to it. The religious zealots, fundamentalists, they are very anti-tech because they don't believe in that plane, so they don't use it. But everywhere else, everybody else has access to it. And in some of the bigger cities, people have their implants that let them power their cell phone through letting the person be the conduit to the the internet plane.
Because everyone's got a little bit of magic.
Yeah, effectively everybody's got a little bit of basically tech psionics.
Okay. So you'd mentioned in your survey that there's like a sort of corporate dystopia kind of feel to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a bit more about that? I'm assuming this is kind of the basic cyberpunk setting kind of feel, but how did that develop, and where is it at now exactly?
I mean, it developed basically from the way my players have played over the years. I don't know why. I think it's fun, but I don't know why. My players just don't play clerics. All of them, for as long as I've known, they've always enjoyed the game being harder, so nobody's a cleric. If someone's a bard, they almost never take healing. The few druids they've had have been focused on combat druids. I've definitely had a few rogues and fighters spend extra feats to be able to do first aid really well. But yeah, my players just don't play really religious characters that often. We usually have probably one amazing paladin like every other campaign. So it's always fun to see who's going to get to be that cool guy now. But yeah, so naturally as the world kept going, I saw no reason to keep including more gods. And so even by the time we get to the 5th or 6th campaign, the players who became gods in the first one are kind of forgotten, and their names are now used like, oh, that's a Victor class warship, and Victor was the name of the fighter guy who got to 30th level.
Oh.
So as people like, oh yeah, like we just call that the SS Hercules kind of thing, they don't think about them as real things anymore. And so, yeah, that's, as I mentioned, like the north half of the continent of Loreth is starting to become a jungle landscape, though it's all tended by genetically modified creatures that are summoned and experimented on by Umbra Pharmaceuticals. The Vithara Consortium, the empire up there, used to be Vith Industries, which was the ones who invented trains and printing presses and things like that. And so as more conflicts start to happen, war starts to go on, so people focus on weapons. So they're the group that makes mech suits and produce a lot of like really well made armors and things like that. So players are caught between, of course, military stuff, but they're all corporate militaries.
Okay.
So, players will have their history like, oh yeah, I used to fight for, Basque Technologies before I finally gave up, became a mercenary, and I've worked for like Black Cat Firearms and whatever other companies. Yeah, so I mean, the most cyberpunky will be in the very southern continent, kind of in the area where like the podcast is taking place and where that third campaign that's where those liches were. That is going to be the most cyberpunky as far as being a place where you get high tech and low life. You do have the rich live higher up, and they have paths between the skyscrapers and things like that. So people over a certain wealth income don't have to go to the ground if they don't want to. And so players usually know when they start there, they are street level thugs, trying to impress a gang so they get enough money so they can leave because they've heard of adventure elsewhere. And a lot of times that takes them into places that their characters were not designed to be, as I do have a fair amount of wilderness out there. I have places that corporations haven't taken over. And so, we do get the players like, well, I'm a lab technician that is learning how to fix cars, and I guess I'm on the run from this draconic ooze that is currently in the shape of a rhino chasing me. Because that's a thing now. Because this pharmaceutical company made them.
And I was thinking, like, so Cyberpunk has this, like, cybernetics thing that's ubiquitous, but there's also occasionally, like, bio enhancement stuff that goes on. Is that a part that you brought into your game?
I have. I did design several drugs. Went through and read a lot of different rules for kind of how to balance cybernetics a bit, without trying not to get too much into them. As they shouldn't be a full replacement for magic items, but it let me find ways to kind of sneak in why people would get those enhancements and those changes, right? 3.0, 3.5 Pathfinder used to have their big six of like items you have to have.
Right.
With this world not having permanent magic items, I'm able to sneak in a few of those belts of strength kind of items through cybernetic enhancement.
And are you still running E6, or was that only for that one campaign?
That was just for that campaign. E10 is where I think we've all landed. All my players also enjoy.
Okay.
Because what we'll usually do is we do E10, and then once you hit 10th level, every session you play, at the end of the session, you can go pick a feat. So your character doesn't become stagnant, but you're never going to get more hit die. Not going to get more to, you'll get more to hit chance through feats and things. But once you hit that 10th level cap, like here's kind of where you are. You can always learn more cool stuff, but you're not going to get 300 hit points, right?
And then do you need as many of the special feats? Because like E6 had a few feats that were just like a way to learn a spell that might be needed. Like you can learn Raise Dead, but you can only use it once per month or something like that was one of the feats. I guess you don't need that many stuff like locked behind feats for that, because at 10th level you kind of have access to a lot of those abilities anyways.
Yeah, that's part of it is perfectly fine as long as it doesn't, violate those thematic things, right? Hey, you can't take that feat that says now you shoot fire out of your hands.
So what are some of the like rule changes that you've made for the cybernetic cyberpunk feel? Do you have like a cyber paladin or something like that?
Cybernetics is treated as equipment. Everybody starts with 3 chip slots, one of which is usually so you have permanent Wi-Fi access, but some players chose not to have that.
Okay.
A lot of the cybernetics, I put point values to them that are based on, or they all have their own point value, and the amount of points you can have in cybernetics is generally equal to your con score or your charisma score, whichever's higher. If for some reason your cybernetic score goes above those, then you start running into glitches and problems. But I tried to make them cost-wise pretty effective so it makes sense in the world why somebody would have basic cybernetics, things like that. With the cybernetic score, so that way you can kind of keep track of like how much a player can actually have before it gets dangerous. I did go through, and for quite a few of them, I put in fun ways that they can be overcharged by using that connection with the constant, with that energy, so that they can do some of those cool, fun, tropey movie moment feels, right?
Right.
You want that sweet moment where you have the steam coming out of the gears in your cyber arms, you punch through a wall or something. Okay, yeah, if you want to burn some conduit points for it to get that, then yeah, we can bring that all along as part of the story. But if things mess up, then maybe your cybernetics get damaged or broken until you get them fixed.
And is fixing them like, I guess, cure light wounds, or how is the fixing prospect work?
Fixing meant that I actually had to go through and really look at all the crafting rules. As part of that, the cure spells in the world, because the pillar that was tied to positive energy is also gone. So they actually don't have cure spells this game. Not that like I said, my players don't play clerics, so most people never use them anyways.
Well, what about those repair spells, I guess?
Yeah.
Those are also gone?
I did not take those away. The few players that have them, I'm fine with them working for that. I think we ended up deciding that like a single casting roughly does like a fair amount, like 2,000 gold worth of repair. So the idea was you could use you can't fix a car on a single cantrip. It would just take a long time, kind of thing.
Okay.
But like those larger spells, like, okay, yeah, you cast Make Whole, the van's up and running again. The engine putters to life, all the bullet holes fixed. You can do that.
Right. You already kind of mentioned time travel a bit for how that had interacted with the world. You mentioned that in your survey.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if there was any other large aspect of time travel that you ran into, or I guess orchestrated, depending on how you want to look at it.
Yeah, so I hinted at my players in the very first game that there were these hallways that the elder gods had kind of put that wrap around the outside of reality. Players didn't really mess with them too much in the first campaign. They all had different stuff to do. But it was until the fourth and fifth campaigns that I had a player who actually put a bunch of points and was like, my guy wants to find the halls. And so I built in the lore of the halls of there's, one door that can go anywhere, but most people perceive it as thousands of doors that go anywhere, any time or location. And trapped in here is where I brought in one of the hidden elder deities that we just called the Dweller, the god of doors. And so to get in the hallway, you can speak with the god of doors, and you can make trades, or you make weird trades with him. Like one player's like, well, I really want to have these, found a very in-game way of saying they wanted some powers. And they had to trade away the memories of their family. Or they had to bring an item. They have to bring something to the Dweller that the Dweller has never seen before. So it's fun. Okay. Early players are like, hey, I'm bringing you, Skittles Jello. And it's like, I've never seen that before. Awesome. What do you want for it? But as more players kept bringing stuff, then it's like, okay, now it's time for, we caught this strange extraplanar creature that's half dragon, half demon, half angel, and 2 parts inevitable. And they're like, groovy. And this giant squid-like T-Rex monster puts it on a shelf and collects it and trades them out for that.
I was thinking it'd be horrifying if he said, I've already seen that.
And so the halls became this big thing that wrapped around the world. And so players would occasionally find a doorway that eventually opens to a hall. And then I got to do a really fun thing. I got 3 new players that all wanted to play in Big Campaign, all recommended by people who've been playing it a long time. And so I did a hall campaign of these 5 players running through and exploring and visiting every previous Big Campaign I've ever done. So they got to go see various historical moments and take items from different time, places, and zones as they kind of made themselves into these, time thief, not quite Doctor Who, but very...
Time bandits.
Yeah, they ended up using this to create the meeting that made all of the gods have to come together so that they could vote on what they're going to do with the crown, which was the person who got turned into the living crown. It became a very fun, large, kind of crazy thing involving all of the players. And that's where we got Discord. So we were able to actually just make a chat room of like, hey, are you a player who's currently in the King's Moot? You can use the King's Moot channel if you want to do any role playing that doesn't involve combat or stuff like that, to explain what your character is trying to do. So that's where you got a lot to mess around with, a lot of weird dimensional stuff, time things. In my current home game, there's some ramifications of that, of other kind of dimensional travelers or time travelers trying to escape realities that almost were. So in game, I took the idea of those players when they were arguing about that crown, of making timelines of each one of them if they had won and what their world would look like. And so now in the current game, they're dealing with kind of the other people from other timelines of games that could have been.
Okay. That's pretty cool. Like exploring the what if situations for your world.
Yeah.
Has that been a fun experience for the new players as well, because they don't have like this large background of knowledge that you and the other players do?
All the players have told me they're having fun, that they're enjoying it. I think I make sure not to speak in a way that I try not to like imply too much automatically or assume too much on my players, since I do have new people usually join every campaign as they kind of rotate in and out. And so a lot of my players are perfectly fine and very good at not using meta knowledge. And so new players I find are great because since they aren't burdened with the baggage of history, they often come up with really cool and crazy ideas that nobody else has. The person who turned the ranger into that living crown, that was his first time ever playing with us, and first time ever playing D&D or Pathfinder at all. And he went from level 1 to level 20, was a gunslinging scion who helped his father create basically a planar bomb before giving away the power of the gods to the ranger because he was a good guy. And that was amazing because all the other players got really upset at it. But that's also interesting because they never would have done that, right? Like it takes new ideas and new people to kind of keep, I think, my world fun, because as they add to it, if they play in the next game, they'll see the ramifications of their own actions and the history they made become real. But while they're still fresh, I think, well, from everything I've talked to them, they're enjoying it because it feels like there's a lot to explore.
Yeah, for sure. I think we hit on most of the things I wanted to talk about. Is there anything you wanted to talk about, or you feel like I should have asked you or missed?
No, I mean, I think, yeah, you covered a lot. I'm excited to go listen to more episodes of your show. I really like the idea of just kind of hearing all these fun stories of other people's worlds.
Yeah, there are some really, really fun ones for sure. We've had other cyberpunk ones. There's also one that was a megastructure, like a sort of, like a Dyson sphere kind of thing, where it encloses around a star.
Oh, fun!
Yeah, all sorts of cool stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, part of the idea of the show wasn't just to give people a chance to present their own material, but also to like listen to other material and come up with new ideas by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of things that you might not realize you're taking in as ideas necessarily, that you do end up realizing, oh yeah, I can use that as a creation point for a reference point for something that I want to create in my own fiction. And seeing how other people do it can create a little nucleus for those kind of ideas for your own self as well.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I'm a glutton for listening. I'm on all the Reddit subreddits for world stuff, and yeah, there's just so many cool. Everybody brings their own history and ideas and thinking to world building, and so it's really fun to hear things that you never could have thought of because your brain just never went down those paths, right? So it's just super neat to hear other people's creativity, and that's really cool that you're running a show that does that.
Oh yeah, thank you. Well, I typically close out by asking for a piece of DMing advice that you might want to give to other people. So you want to give that a crack?
Yeah. My biggest piece of DMing advice would be your players are your greatest resource, and they can help you do so much more if you bring them into the process. And so, as a longtime GM, to any new GMs out there, you can still rough them up. You can still do fun monster stuff. You can still, threaten their lives with everything, but lean into letting them help you build. And I think you'll notice that your games will run a lot smoother.
Yeah, I think it is ultimately collaborative storytelling, and it can be collaborative at the beginning, not just in the execution of the story. So that's some good advice.
Yeah, now that makes me want to go off a whole different small tangent, but no, that's fun.
All right, well, cool. Thanks for coming on the show, Jeph. It was great having you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Isaac, and look forward to hearing more episodes. How long have you been playing, or what do you play? What do you play these days?
Let's see. I started playing in 2000, so 24 years now. Same group the whole time. Started playing when I was 9.
Okay.
And currently we're playing 5th edition. I have been wanting to play the Speaker in Dreams module from 3rd edition for a long time. But I had other campaigns that I wanted to do instead, and we're kind of in between campaigns right now. And I was like, I want to do Speaker in Dreams, but I want to make it interesting because I don't want to go back to 3.0 or 3.5. So I converted it to 5th edition.
Oh, fun. What is the?
Which was mostly just like, this monster is a were rat, so where's the were rat in 5th edition? Okay, cool. There it is. All right. Same thing. We won't worry too much about if it's perfectly balanced. It's close enough.
Right on.
Yeah, we're just starting that now.
Okay, cool. No, that's really fun. It's rare to meet other people who've been geeking with their buds for as long as we have,
Yeah, it is an unusual experience. Most people don't get that chance.
Yeah, and I mean, oh geez, over the years I've definitely sat at some pretty weird tables where it's like, oh, I want to go back to playing with my friends. This place is uncomfortable.
Yeah, I do remember that sometimes from when I was in college, where the sort of general gaming group that the college had together, there were definitely some people there that felt like I'd been playing for 10 years at that point, and I feel like I'd sort of matured as a player, and these were people coming in like maybe it was their second time playing ever, and there's like the hack and slash attitude where you want to like run roughshod over something.
Uh-huh.
Because you're used to like video games where there's so many restrictions that are placed on yourself. When those restrictions go away, players that come in from that experience tend to run a little bit wild. That's kind of what I saw there, and I was like, I don't want to go through that again. I've done that.
I always think it's fun to play that game when you meet a new player of like, did you find your way to role-playing games through video games or through books? And nowadays, I guess I'd have to add like podcasts, right?
Well, or yeah, I guess YouTube shows.
Yeah, like there's a third pillar, I think, there now. Because it's always really fun. My little brother tried to play and has played, but first time he played, he's like, sweet, so can I eat this dwarf so I can get my hit points back? And it's like, oh, buddy, that's weird. No. And you're not playing Fallout, so no.
You have to be a lizard folk for that to work.
Which that's but yeah, but then you have the players who come in like, okay, well, here's my backstory of blah 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 blah, and you're like, dope. You also have read 7 different R.A. Salvatore books. Do keep in mind you are level 1. And of course, those people are like, oh, but my tome of a backstory, and you're like, just what if we make that story with your character instead? So it's always fun seeing how new players come in and want to start doing stuff based on, the stuff that inspired them, right? Like, I read a lot of Lord of the Rings. I want to be a hobbit.
Yeah. I did the sort of powerful story once by having that character have amnesia, and then like his leveling up was him like slowly remembering his previous life and reclaiming those skills that he developed.
Oh, fun. Okay, I like that.
Yeah. That worked. And he still has the cool backstory, but not all of the cool abilities and items that come with it.
Yeah, and that's perfect, right? That's kind of one of those things, the longer you play, the more you can kind of make those weird things where other people are like, well, how come I can't play 20th level Wizard Amnesiac? It's like, because that person understands they're playing a level 1 wizard and going up to 20, and they're just remembering the cool stuff they could do. Versus you actually, you're coming at it with well, I used to be 20th level. Can I have all these contacts, or can I have at least this, or whatnot?
Yes, as long as there's no mechanical benefit to any of that on balance is the adventure.
Right, exactly, and that's always a tough thing for some people to hear. It's like, cool, yes, but it can have no actual benefit in a way that would blah blah. And they're like, well, then why would I do that? It's like, and that's the difference between an experienced player and not. Your experienced player is like, I like that flavor, I'm in. Or why don't you have contacts? Oh, I was a huge jerk when I was a 20th level wizard, so none of these people want to talk to me.
Oh man, yeah, it was interesting when that character ran into people he'd known before he got amnesia, and him remembering parts of them but not all of them. Like one of them was like the one responsible for the injury that gave him amnesia, so of course he didn't remember that, and ended up still having a feeling of distrust for that character and ended up killing him. But Never figured out the truth. It was a reveal that I came up with at the end of the campaign after we'd finished.
Oh, awesome. That's fun.
Thank you for listening. I've seen a lot of growth in the show over the last few months, and I'd like to keep it going. You can help by rating and reviewing the show on your favorite podcast app, telling a friend, or by telling any game masters you know to send in a survey to be on the show. You can find that survey at gocorral.com/STS. That's GOCORRAL.com/STS.